It's Lucy Litch, and this is Tiny House Conversations. It's the Australian-based podcast where I interview experienced tiny houses, tiny builders, and adventurers in the tiny world so you can discover how to create, build, and transition into tiny life. Welcome back to Tiny House Conversations. Joining me on the show today is Kathy and Matt McMillan, who are experienced tiny houses from the mid-north coast of New South Wales. Kathy and Matt have been living in their pre-loved tiny house on wheels since April 2021. And 10 years ago, they started questioning their stressful city life and excessive consumption. They had busy corporate jobs, a mortgage, and mounting personal debt just to keep up with all the things they thought they needed. Going tiny was a conscious decision to live more sustainably, downsizing to what they really needed, and fueled by a desire to slow down, live simply in the peace and quiet of nature. Financial freedom was a motivator, along with freeing up time to concentrate on meaningful pursuits and most importantly, living close to family. And in this conversation, we talk about why Matt and Kathy chose to buy a pre-loved tiny home instead of DIY building, their off-the-grid setup, including what they do with solar, water, a composting toilet, and management of grey water, how living in a tiny house connects you to everyday life and nature. We also talk about what they love most about tiny life, some misconceptions they commonly hear about tiny house living, and plenty more. So let's go chat with Matt and Kathy. Hi, Kathy and Matt. Welcome to Tiny House Conversations, and thanks so much for joining me on the show today.
Thanks for having us, Lucy.
Hey, Lucy. Thanks for having us on.
My pleasure. Thank you for being here. And both of you live in a beautiful tiny home on the mid-north coast of New South Wales on Kathy's family farm where you grew up. And I'd love if you're able to tell us more about what inspired you to want to live in a tiny house and what appealed to you about the tiny lifestyle.
I think for me, it was about simplifying everything, downsizing and living with what we need rather than what we think we should have in our lives. We previously lived in Brisbane in a 3-bedroom house, and prior to that, we actually owned a unit and had a mortgage, which was quite crippling. And you're constantly pursuing more things and getting into debt to do it. I think we started thinking about how we were living about 10 years ago, and that probably was when things started changing for us in terms of what we really value. And it's not really things, it's having time, which I think living in a tiny house frees you up a lot more. I think that was probably the starting process for me anyway.
We've been watching tiny house YouTube clips for a few years and just got more and more interested and they look so cozy, and it came down to simplifying life and also cost effective, because we didn't want to get into another big mortgage, and we liked the idea of living out in nature and on some land. So it just really appealed, just the cost effectiveness, and you can take it and move it around, and there's lots of different things you can do with it. So I think that's what appealed for me anyway.
Yeah, beautiful. It seems to be that, this tiny lifestyle really realigns us with what is most important and what we value the most in life. And simplicity and lowering the costs of living also seem to be something that's so common for so many of us that look towards that way. I think from just both of what you just said, it's like this reassessing of, well, what is it that we actually need to be happy, to feel, good about the way that we're living, and what is it that we really need in our life. And, this idea of minimalism, I think, comes into it so much as well.
Absolutely. I think too, your perspective changes the older you get too, when you start questioning all of the shoulds that society throws your way. Like there's a formula for how your life is supposed to go, that you're meant to, get a job and earn lots of money and then get a mortgage and get married and have children. And it's just kind of this process that's expected of you, and you don't really question it. And I mean, it's all built around the consumerist sort of society, that it's all to do with consumption and buying a house and a nicer car and all of that sort of thing. And you don't stop and question it, I think, until one day you do and think to yourself, what are we actually doing here? Like, is this making us happy? And in our case, it definitely wasn't. We were just constantly pursuing what we thought we should have, and it wasn't making us happy. So I think a big catalyst for us stopping and taking stock of what was important was when my mum got sick in late 2017. She had lung cancer, and then she died in May the following year. And that kind of gave us a real shake of, what are we doing with our lives? And we're living in a city away from family, and it's just not worth it. So I think that changed our perspective a lot. So living with Dad close by now is priceless. It's amazing.
I love that, and I'm really sorry to hear as well. I can empathize with that too, because I feel like I had a similar experience when I lost my dad many years ago too, and just it makes you just, I guess it's a wake up call of sorts, isn't it? It makes you go, well, what is most important? And it always comes back to family and community as well. And I love hearing that your dad is nearby too, because I think that what tiny house living, another thing that it opens up for people is this multi-generational living, being able to be closer together on the same property, still maintaining independence though as well. You have your own home, you're able to be present in each other's lives, but then also have that space for each to live their lives as well. So I love that. And how is that for your dad? How is he getting a lot out of that as well?
I think so. Like, we were able to help him out a lot, and vice versa. He comes and helps us when we need things done as well. So, and sharing his knowledge, like
yeah, definitely. I've learned a lot from Kevin, building things with him, and he helped us build our deck and put the shed together, and just there's things like that. I've learned a lot just working with him, which has been good.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I've got other family as well in the area, so my brother's helped us with things as well. Like, just having that family around has been a massive thing for us, because we lived in Brisbane for a long time where we didn't have any family around, and it was because we were pursuing careers and felt, I guess, when I was younger, I didn't want to live in the country. I couldn't wait to get away and go to uni and do all that sort of stuff and live in the city. But now I completely understand why my parents chose this property and to bring up their children in nature. I totally get it now. So I just wish we did it sooner.
Yeah. Just the peace and quiet. I think that's what I like the most, is just sick of living in big cities and suburbs, just constant noise, constant traffic. And you not only feel your own stress increasing, but you're so exposed to other people's stress. And I think it all just accumulates. And I remember sitting on the bus on the way into Brisbane CBD on the way to work, and I commuted every day, a couple of hours of sitting on a hot, crowded bus in a Brisbane summer with the aircon not working, just lining up to go into the bus. And I'm just looking around, and I always ask myself, like, what are we doing? What am I doing? Is this life? Is this what we want?
Yeah, definitely. There is that. Definitely those aspects of city living, and I can relate to that as well, having lived in the city or suburbs for most of my life. And I think that what I feel is that, I guess, many of us, because Kathy, you mentioned, you're like, oh, I wish I would have done that sooner. And I often say that as well. I wish I would have realized that sooner. And then I'm like, at the same time, though, I think it's cool that, like, we all just kind of had to go through our lives to experience and then get to this place of learning and realizing and then coming back to, I guess, what's most important and what's most natural and back to basics, which I guess is on some level part of the human experience and our complexity of doing things the hard way. And then at some point we're like, actually, it's so much more simple, but we make it complicated. So yeah, I hear you with that. And your tiny house is a pre-loved home. So I'm curious, how and where did you find your tiny house?
Found it on tinyrealestate.com.au, I think it is. Just a site that is for selling tiny homes. We'd previously thought we were going to build a new tiny home, having watched all the shows and had all these ideas, and we'd been planning it for a long time, the sort of features that we wanted and so forth. And we applied for finance for that, but I wasn't working at the time. And without a guarantor, it wasn't possible to get the finance that we needed for a new build because tiny homes are becoming quite expensive. So it made us stop and reassess, and we kind of shelved the idea for a bit. And then we found this secondhand home, and we thought, well, this actually aligns with our values a lot more. Like we buy most of our things secondhand where we can. I'm always op shopping and, don't want to waste things. It kind of fit with that ethos and we could afford it. And I think, it's not what we would have envisaged when we were having these plans of building this beautiful home, and it was going to be a lot bigger than the one we've got. We're currently living in a 6 metre by 2.4, which is on the smaller side. Most average tinies are the 7.2 metre. But we kind of took a look at why we were doing it, and affordability was a big thing. We just paid off all of our personal debt. That was part of the plan of actually getting to the point we could buy a tiny house. And the thought of, we almost borrowed a lot more than we originally intended because we got caught up in the whole wanting new and shiny. And
it would have been double what we paid for this,
for what we got. And in doing that, in buying a secondhand tiny, we were then able to, we paid cash for it to be towed up from Victoria, and that's not cheap. We were able to pay cash for all our setup costs, so our water tanks, solar, which is massive.
That's a big cost. Initial layout, definitely.
Yeah, so being able to pay cash for all those things and minimise the amount of debt that we were in, like it worked out the way it was supposed to, definitely.
And once you live in it, this for a while, it's secondhand, but it's only a couple of years old, and it was built by, I think, one of the first tiny home builders, so it's really good quality, good build. There's a few things that we'd change, but I think this is a good opportunity. We've saved some money. We managed to get into, I guess, the tiny house market, and we can now sort of just think about, okay, this works, this doesn't. So when we do eventually down the track, if we do decide to build a bigger one or move into a different one, we have a better idea of what we like and what works well. But the more I live in this, that you can see it's excellent quality, and it's more than big enough. I mean, the 7.2 would be great, just having that little bit more lounge space or a study area or something like that. But overall, we haven't felt cramped. We haven't felt confined at all, especially with a nice big deck. It's great. It's very homely.
I love how you talked about potentially thinking of building your own home, and then this came up instead, a pre-loved home, and that you're able to have that experience of seeing what works and what doesn't work, and even, I guess, then adding to the house of building a deck. And so then, you're able to still be involved in parts of the home and put your own, touches and things like that around the home and outside of the home. And then, as you say as well, potentially building another home in the future and with more awareness and maybe more idea of, well, what is it that you actually really want and what's most valuable for you, and where do you spend the most time in the home and how much space do you actually need and all those things. And You mentioned just before there's some things that you feel like you might change. What were some of those things?
For me, it was, like I quickly mentioned before, just having an area, maybe a separate area for study. We do have a lounge area, and we've set up a standing workstation, and we've put a monitor on the wall, which it's been great. But just having that little bit more room, be a front door. It's just a standard hinge door that opens up. I'd probably think about a larger sort of entrance, maybe a double sliding door, something like that goes out onto the deck. Just allows a bit more room, more light that comes in. And also, probably this is a big one for Kath, the toilet is on the wrong side, really. If you have a deck out to the front of the house, the toilet windows comes onto the deck. So I think we'd swap that around with the shower, which is on the other side. Just little things like that, nothing too major, but just little sort of day-to-day practical things that I'd change.
Yeah, I think a big benefit for having that 7.2 metres would be having a little bit more room for the stairs and being able to have not such high treads. Like our treads of our stairs are 30 centimetres, which is quite high. I've actually had a bit of a fall down them once when I slipped because they are quite high. So the staircase is something I'd probably want to have more sort of standardised size treads if possible. But, you get used to those sorts of things. It's always a compromise.
Yeah, I mean, it's got a short space to get up into a loft, so it's got to incline quite sharply. And we don't have a handrail or anything, so we've actually had people walk up there and they've got nothing physically wrong with them, but they just were not confident at all. So I don't think it's for everyone, the steep stairs. So, yeah, probably if you did have a longer tiny house, you'd definitely have a slighter gradient, I guess, and yeah, not as deep stair treads.
But one thing we did change, we added to, was in the bedroom loft, we added a balustrade and a gate because we've got 2 small dogs and they sleep in the bed with us. So we had to make it safe for them. So that's something that we did add to make it a little bit more user-friendly for what we needed.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. And you mentioned before about solar and water and you're off the grid. Are you able to share with us a little bit more about what your off-grid setup looks like? And if you don't mind as well, maybe even costs involved?
I'll talk about the water tank and then I'll let Matt talk about the solar because that's his domain. So we've just got a 15,000 litre water tank. So we collect water off the roof. While we were collecting just off the tiny roof before we put the roof on the deck, we weren't able to collect enough water because it's such a small space and we knew that was going to happen. So we had to pay to have the tank filled once. Now that we've got the deck roof, and our deck is 3 metres by 6 metres, so it's actually bigger floor space than the actual tiny. We're able to collect a lot more water. During summer, the tank will overflow. During winter, it might get a bit lower and we'll have to be a bit more conscious. But
it's only a couple $100 to get 15,000 litres.
Yeah, but we want to minimise that as much as possible. But we've also got a second tank in our veggie garden. We're lucky enough that we've got a dam at the bottom of the hill that we pump up to. So we just use dam water for watering our veggie garden. But, yeah, that's the tanks and the solar. Over to you, Matt.
Well, with the water tank, we've got a small water pump underneath the house, which is more than enough water pressure. It's good, nice, strong pressure. So that pumps into the house. What else? Yeah, so the solar, we've got 4 400-watt panels. I think there's SunPower Max-in panels. So they were at the time, a year ago, the best you can get. It's probably changed even now. I don't think you can get higher than 400-watt panels at the moment, but that'll probably change. So they're quite large, but I weighed up different types of different setups. You can have the panels on like a trailer or separate somewhere else on the property and run your cable to your solar infrastructure, your inverter and thing, your batteries, etc. But I heard some things about the longer the cable you got, you lose more power. And also we wanted it so we didn't have too much to tow around if we did have to move around. So I thought, no, we'll put it on the roof. There was a perfect amount of room for the 4 panels. Another, if I could, maybe down the track, one more panel would probably be great, more so just for winter because the sun is quite low. And if it can be a struggle sometimes if we want to use the oven or wash some clothes, whatever, in winter, it can chew up a bit of juice and you're not getting the batteries charged up like you are in summer. So I'd probably have one more panel would be ideal, but with solar, the more panels you have, the more batteries you got to have, and then the more batteries you have, the more power you need to draw in to keep them topped up and healthy. So it's a bit of a never-ending loop. So you got to stick with what you need. And we went through a great company. They did like a power demand analysis. So you send them information on every appliance that you're going to use, how long you're going to use it for, and all the specifications. And they're really good at basically building a system for you that should have sufficient, and they can forecast over a year what your average power consumption will be and what you'll get from the panels depending on the area you live in. So we had a pretty good idea of what it'll be like. But yeah, but they've got the 4 panels, and that feeds into a solar cabinet that we've got bolted to the side of the house, and the battery cabinet as well. So it keeps it protected from the weather, and I've put a bit of an awning over it just for additional protection from the rain, and more so probably the sun, the heat on the cabinets. And yeah, and the main cabinet's got most of the infrastructure in there, the inverter, the controller or the charger, which basically that tells the inverter how much power is coming in, and it can control, for example, how much power goes into the batteries. Once the batteries are full, it senses that, and it goes into different phases to make sure the batteries don't get topped up too much. And same with if the batteries run too low, it'll turn off the batteries automatically to save them. So there's quite a lot of little gadgets in that cabinet, but it's definitely worth spending the money on because, yeah, if you don't spend the money, you tend to get poor componentry and it can fail. There's 2 batteries we've got. They're lithium batteries, and they're about all up, it's about 158 amp hour, and they're quite big and heavy, so they needed their own cabinet, needed to be bolted to the side of the Tiny as well. But they were $3,000 each, so very expensive, but they're really good batteries and they last a good 10, 12 years. And that's just what they are at the moment. Like, I'm sure battery technology will get better and hopefully they'll get cheaper, but they're $3,000 each. All up, the whole entire package, panels, inverter, all the other componentry, cabinets, batteries, and for 2 electricians to professionally install it, came to about $18,000 all up.
Yeah. We've also got a generator as a backup as well. So if we do have a bunch of rainy weather, then we've got the generator to top the batteries up, but we also use that when they get below a certain level.
In summer, yeah, I haven't really had to touch the generator unless we have a couple of really dark, cloudy, rainy days. You do need to just top up, just run it for a couple of hours and just top the batteries up. It's more so in winter. You've got to keep these batteries, the more cycles they go through. A cycle is, let's say it's pumped up to 100% and you use it down to 70%, and then it charges back up again from the panels or generator. That's one cycle. And they only have so many cycles in their life span, I guess. So the deeper the cycle, the less they have, the less power you use, the more longevity you get out of them. So in winter, because you can drain the battery right down to 40%, 30%, you want to plug the generator in every 2 weeks, I think it is, and make sure that you charge it up fully, just to help. I think it's something to do with the warranty as well, but also just to keep the longevity in your batteries. So there's there's quite a bit you got to keep an eye on with solar. But like I said, from about August to April, end of April, maybe even early May, we get more than enough from the sun. And it's only in those darker 2 or 3 months in the middle of winter when we've got to use the generator every now and then.
So I was just going to say, just being on solar, you become more conscious of your energy usage, and it sort of blows my mind, like how much power the average person uses without even thinking about it.
Just a toaster is like 700-800 watts. Like I know too much about wattage now about appliances. I'm looking at the back of them and, oh wow, this is only 200 watts.
Yeah, and we try and use any heat producing appliances because they're the ones that use a lot of electricity. So the oven, we've got an electric oven, toaster, that sort of thing. I don't even use a hairdryer or hair straightener or anything like that anymore. Like it just doesn't happen. But try and use the oven in particular. I only do baking during the day, just to avoid doing it at night. It uses up a lot of power.
Yeah, it sounds like, just the system of solar really, and water obviously as well, and other things, but it makes you really conscious of your choices and your habits and your behaviors. And there's maybe a lot more to consider. And there's an investment in it too, but at the end of the day, it's worth it, and it's money well spent, because it's also helping you to, especially if you really value, being off the grid and minimizing your impact on using too much water and using too much electricity and resources and all of that. I think it's definitely a great investment. And I'd love to know, you mentioned before, Matt, the company does a power analysis. What was the company that you guys
used? So we went through SAE Group. They're based in Tweed Heads, and they mainly service northern New South Wales and southeast Queensland, but they do go as far down south as, I think, Taree. And they were great. Like I went to lots of different contractors, probably about 10 or 12, and some didn't even get back to me. Some didn't want to know about it as soon as they heard it sort of off-grid for a tiny house. But SAE Group were straight back to me pretty much same day. There's a couple of emails back and forth, and they gave me a very confident quote proposal very quickly, and we ended up going through them, but they were great.
Oh, that's really good to know, because I think if someone, especially if you're new to going off the grid, is, how much am I going to actually need when it comes to what I'm using and all of that. And I'll put, for anyone that's interested in checking that out, I'll put the link in the show notes to that company. I'd also love to know, what kind of setup do you guys have for managing your grey water?
So the grey water's pretty basic. We've just got a pipe. We've got all the plumbing set up that came with the house, which was handy. And I've just basically run a pipe down through the ground quite deep and then out into like a gravel trench. And we try to be really careful about what goes down the sink. We don't use any chemicals or things like that. So I do want to work on that. It is something that's on my list to do, but we've been pretty flat out the last 12 months. But I would like to try and collect that somehow and filter it a bit more and potentially use it for the garden. But, yeah, I just don't know what that looks like at the moment. There's so many different things you can do. But at the moment, it seems to be working fine. So,
yeah, I think because we've got the dam water, it hasn't been a high priority to collect and treat that water. If we didn't have the dam, then it definitely would, because growing veggies is a big part of what we're doing at the moment.
The grey water, and I'll let Cass talk about the compost toilet if you want.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about that and how that's going for you. Is it a commercial one that came with the home?
The original owner, it came with one of the, I don't know what brand it was, but one of the toilets that basically has a tank underneath that collects everything that then gets rotated. So there was 4 tanks, I think. We ended up getting a separate tiny, and we've had that for 3 months. I've actually got a review post ready to put on Instagram about that this week. We actually love it. It's awesome.
Swedish companies, really well designed, really good quality.
Yeah, so the toilet basically separates the solids and liquids out into 2 separate chambers. There is an option for the liquids tank to actually go out into a bigger tank to be emptied less frequently, or you can also have it go out into a urine trench. We've just gone with the internal small tank that we empty probably every 1.5, 2 days, which is no big deal because we live on a property. It gets emptied in different places all the time. And the solids tank, it gets emptied once a week, and we've got large compost bins that the solid waste goes into to be composted. So basically after about a year, we'll be able to use that on fruit trees. It's not recommended to be used on your garden directly, but on fruit trees. And
not 3 months like they recorded me saying on ABC.
No, 12 months. 12 months.
That was a mistake. Basically putting fresh feces on fruit trees. No, we're not.
But I mean, as far as like the toilet, user friendliness and stuff, we think it's great.
It's been, I think for me the toilet fan is just so much better designed, sealed. You can hardly hear it. It uses the power doesn't even really register that it's on, and it's on 24 hours a day. It's by far the best we've used anyway.
Yeah, it's getting good reviews. It's quite the separate tiny is quite new. Like there's the separate villa that I think a lot of tiny homes have in these days.
But they're expensive.
Yeah, I mean they're all expensive.
Yeah.
But I think you probably get what you pay for, and it's the same with a lot of things. But I mean we kind of made do with what we had for a
few months.
6 months.
6 months.
But the difference is so much better.
Absolutely. And also how much water you're saving. That's another thing that so much water.
Oh, yeah, it'd be massive.
Yeah.
When I go to someone's house now and use a normal toilet, it's just like, oh, my God, all that water.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah, exactly. And if you don't mind also sharing, so you mentioned you've got a pre-loved tiny home and you bought the home off Tiny Real Estate. How much was the overall cost of your home? I know that you added the solar, water tank and a deck and all of that, but do you have like a rough price of those costs?
Yeah. So the tiny house itself was $67,000, which at the moment I don't think you can find one quite that cheap because we bought just before I think everyone started going a bit crazy. I've actually seen this model maybe a year newer than ours go for a lot more than that secondhand. So I know that's probably not good news for people who are considering buying a secondhand tiny home at the moment. But I think the demand is pushing prices up overall. And something I think that also is pushing prices up is a lot of investors are buying them as Airbnb income opportunities, which is quite frustrating because it means that they're not as affordable. And I think that's what tiny house living should be about, how affordable they are as an alternative housing option. But as far as, $67,000 for us, we still borrowed money to purchase this, but we paid cash for all the setup costs and all of the things that we did to the place, like the solar and so forth, since then. But something that people who are considering borrowing money for a tiny house is it can be quite tricky getting finance. A lot of the banks won't touch a tiny house loan. They're not really recognised so much as being an asset that they can securitise. As it is, we borrowed from a finance company and the maximum we could borrow, and this is the case for most personal loans, is $50,000. The remaining $17,000, the seller actually offered vendor finance, which was so smart of him because he knew that most lenders will only lend $50,000. So they were smart. So we're paying him back as well. His loan's prioritised, so we're getting that paid off this year. But I think that's something tiny house owners should also keep in mind when they're selling their houses, is what finance the buyer will actually be able to easily get, and consider offering vendor finance, because if we hadn't been offered that, then we may not have been able to buy it, or it might have meant that we couldn't move in for a lot longer because we'd have to save up to pay for solar for a lot longer. So that's something kind of to keep in mind, is the finance side of it can be a little bit tricky. If you've got, say, a parent who's willing to go guarantor and put their home as an asset, then you can borrow a bit more, but there's no way that either of us
because it's a personal loan, the interest rates are a bit higher.
Yeah.
Which is a negative, but that's where it's at, unfortunately, at the moment.
Yeah, but I mean, we've got a 5-year loan, but we're going to be easily paid off in 3. So I think you need to consider what you can afford and not overextend. The same with buying any kind of standard house as well. Yeah, you don't want to borrow more than you can afford to pay back. I think the big thing too is also paying off all your personal debt before you even consider it. It will make life a lot easier and mean that you can pump a lot more money into paying the home off, so then you can be financially independent and not have to worry about payments a lot sooner.
Unless you've sold your $1 million Sydney home, you're cash rich. You can buy a 10-metre tiny house.
Yeah, I mean that's really great to know about the seller and the finance, and also good to know that there's options for making it work for people's different situations, and also 3 to 5 years compared to, say, 30, 40, 50 years of a regular home. That's, really, really good. So
absolutely. I mean, and we paid off our personal debt on one income. We're still on one income now. I worked for a few months while we were saving up for solar full time, but prior to that, I had to close down my photography business during the first lockdown, just because photography was not something that was top of people's lists to pay for. So that kind of, went out the window, but that's okay. But I think in the whole reassessment of how we were living, like what we were spending our money on came into sharp focus as well. I mean, the goal for both of us eventually is to both work part-time and earn enough to pay for our expenses and just, live simply but enjoy life, and have time to do the things we want to do.
Exactly. And would you say that's one of the best things about, living the tiny life, or, now that you've been there for a little while now and experienced it, what are some of the best things for both of you?
For me, it's definitely the peace and quiet, being able to live out in nature, but also just the simplicity of it. And I really love the loft. It's just crawling into bed at night. It's really cozy up there, particularly in winter. And it's just very restful and calming. And now we've got the deck, just sitting out on the deck as well. Yeah, I think it's just been it's brought a lot of peace and calm to our lives. But also for me, I don't know if this is for Kath, but there's little things you got to do each day. They're not really a chore, but I quite enjoy them. They're just basic things, and they just help keep you more in the moment. So this might sound silly, but okay, the gas runs out, you got to change the gas bottle, keep an eye on the solar. I got to go to the cabinet and just see how it's going, or I've got to do something, build something small, or just maintain, or go down to the dam and pump some water up. Like, just these little tasks, they help calm me as well, and then keep me more in the moment. And I quite enjoy just doing those little things each day. And it just helps you be a bit more grateful about how lucky we are, but also, if you want to have this sort of off-grid life, there is a little bit of work to do, but it's just so worth it. Just gives you that sort of independence. We don't have to worry about blackouts, water being cut off, or gas being cut up. Well, we can't guess. You really appreciate all those little small things. So.
With that, you become a little bit more connected with your daily life, and appreciate, where your power is coming from, and you you actually, I don't know, connected to the weather a bit more. You've got more of a vested interest, but it makes you sort of more connected with everything, I think. Just more conscious of your consumption. And
because living in a city, you can just switch off.
Yeah.
Because everything's so easy and available and just there. So you don't have to think about that. So you become a bit of a zombie, and I think that's why everyone just gets head down into their phones and technology and work, because they don't have to think about those basic things of living.
Yeah. One of my favourite things, and this, when we were thinking about going tiny and we were just watching the shows on YouTube and we'd kind of just be like, oh, could we do this? And it was all a dream. I think one of the reasons we decided we could do it was because we were always pretty much in the same room together all the time. We've got two small dogs, Chloe and Weber, and they want us together all the time. If we were in separate rooms, they'd somehow herd us together. So knowing that we could comfortably be in a small space all the time and we enjoy each other's company and we can just
You've got to get along.
Yeah.
One morning. People out there, you've got to get along.
Nowhere to hide.
That's exactly right. Yeah, but I think we're still in that one space together, and we've always kind of enjoyed that, and we continue to enjoy that. I think also being connected to nature in that you can see outside from every window. It's not like when we lived in a unit, you'd look outside and you'd just see someone's fence or someone else's unit, or, and there'd be people talking and you're kind of immersed in their lives, and it's distracting rather than being surrounded by nature and it being right there. Like when it rains, you can feel it's really raining in here. It's not like you've got a house that, it's like, oh, it's raining outside, so what? It's like it's raining and it's right there next to you, and it's really beautiful.
I love that you both talked about that connection with nature and your daily, everyday life and doing those little things, because I feel like this convenience culture and this outsourcing of everything that we do in I guess city Western type life really disconnects us from those things and disconnects us from our natural environment, and which is our true home and where we came from at the end of the day. And I can imagine it being just, you're also learning so many things along the way, and having that, you talked before, Matt, about gratitude and appreciation for all of these things. So I'd love also to know, what's one of the most challenging parts about tiny house living?
I think this whole year's been challenging in that we've had to learn how to do a lot of things that we had never done before, or maybe just kind of touched on but not been fully immersed in. And I think you become a bit paralysed when you've got something you need to do, like building the deck, for example, or, working out what the solar requirements are or whatever. You can become a bit paralysed because you don't know what to do, and you can research things, but because you've never done it before,
you can overthink it and hesitate. But I think we've learned that though in the last year. Like if something needs doing, we just probably a bit more automatic. Like we just crack on and get it done.
Yeah,
which helps your resilience a bit. But I think one of the worst things is our stovetop. There's only 2 burner. There's not enough room. But just in the kitchen, you got to be very good at putting things away and keeping it neat and tidy. But sometimes if we're cooking a big meal, you're kind of constantly like moving pots and pans around and trying to make room, and you got to do this first to get that out of the way, and then you can grab this bowl and put that there. And it might sound a bit strange, but that's probably one thing that you get better at it, but you can't really escape. It's just, you are in a tiny house and you have got limited space. So you got to be very organised and disciplined and wash up and put everything away, and you can't leave it hanging around like if you've got a big kitchen in a standard size home like you could there.
I'd also love to know, are there any misconceptions about living in a tiny house that you might commonly hear within the tiny community, or people that are looking to this way of living?
Good question. Misconceptions. Something that actually really drives me crazy all the time, and I'm going to come back to compost toilets here, is that you hear people, whenever they're interviewed about compost toilets, like they'll say, it doesn't smell at all. I'm going to tell you right now, that's a load of crap, because it is.
On the pun.
Yeah, pardon the pun. It's a bucket of poo.
Yeah.
It's going to smell. Like it's the toilet we've got now, it's great. Like it's really good. Way better than the one we had previously. And the fan does a great job drying things out and everything. But it is still,
when it's coming to the end of the week. The odd
tiny
whiff.
houses out there that keep saying it doesn't smell at all. You're lying.
Yeah.
And I think that toilets are something that people research like to the nth degree, because it's such a foreign concept. And if you've not used one before, like you have all these questions and you still don't believe what people say. So I'm being honest here. Like,
I think for me, a misconception is like, when you tell people, oh, you live in a tiny house, they go, oh, so you live in a caravan.
Oh, yeah.
And they think that it's like living in a caravan. But whenever, like when we had the water topped up, or we get a delivery of all the materials for the decking roof or something like that, whenever they come, they're like, oh, tiny house, and I've heard about these. And you show them in and they're like, oh, wow, it's really like a house. Like it's built like a house. There's so much more room than a caravan. So I think that's one misconception, is they see from the outside, but they don't realise like what it's like being inside. And if you've got it well set out and working well and everything's nice and neat and tidy, then it really does feel like a lot of space, because they're very tall roofs. Ours is like 4.2 metres or something. 4.3. So it does feel like a lot of space once you're in here. Maybe just because we've been in it for a while, so it feels bigger to us now. But a lot of people, when they finally pop their head in, they are surprised at how big it is and what it looks like.
Yeah. I think also people, so this isn't a misconception from people who want to go tiny, but from people who've never even thought about it, is that there must be something wrong if we don't want to live in a normal house, like that there must be something wrong with our finances, or something went wrong, like that we've had to do this as a last resort, which is not the case. We've had a mortgage before, and having that noose around our necks is not something we want to do again. But people don't really wrap their heads around that. They think, oh, we're living in a tiny house on the property I grew up on. There must be something wrong, like to come back home in my 40s. But it's not the case. Like, it's a choice. It's a choice to live more simply. It's a choice to live close to family, because when Mum died, it put it into perspective how little time I'd actually spent with my family. And it's a really beautiful way to do it, and be able to share our time and our resources and just everything. So I think that's a misconception from people who don't get it, who don't understand what tiny living can be about.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting you say that, because probably maybe a month ago or something, I saw someone post online on Facebook. It was underneath someone's tiny house post, and they said something like, why would anyone actually choose to live in a tiny house if it wasn't out of necessity? Or would anyone choose to live in a tiny house if it wasn't out of necessity? And that question caught my attention, because I was like thinking about it for myself, and I was like, well, you know what? I know for me, if it were to, have the choice of the big house and the mortgage and all the things versus being in a tiny house, I would actually choose a tiny house without having, the necessity of whatever it might be. So, finances or whatever, and I know that there's many people like that too. So I definitely hear you where I hear that misconception, and that's not the first time I've heard that kind of thing too. So I think it's great to have these conversations like we're having today, to, I guess, help people understand and maybe reframe what tiny house living is, and allowing people to understand the possibilities that can come from that way of life, if that's something that they're curious about, if they resonate with it. So I love that you said that. And I'd also just love to know, and as we start to wrap up the conversation today, is there anything that you guys wish you knew back when you started on your tiny house lifestyle journey?
Maybe I wish I knew a little bit more about solar.
Mm-hmm.
I had to learn on the run. That would have been good, but yeah, I don't think so. I mean, it's been hard work, but it's all pretty straightforward and logical. And
I think we spent such a long time researching.
yeah,
Like really, it was 5 years really.
Yeah, I guess we're prepared.
That we kind of started thinking about it. Like I research things pretty fully when I'm interested in something. I think we were pretty well researched and we kind of knew what we were getting ourselves into. Yeah, I mean, maybe from that, I think it's probably important for anyone who's thinking about going tiny to just research as much as you possibly can, like gather as much information as you can.
But at the same time, you just need to do it.
Yeah, that's true.
It's the only way to learn is just to do it and make the mistakes. Like you can't mitigate against everything. For example, the gutters, I followed YouTube clips down to the letter and they didn't take into account quite a few things and they were supposed to be a roofing expert. So I've learned now how to do it properly. So, yeah, sometimes you just have to do it. You just have to get stuck in and you can't be too prepared.
Yeah, and I guess that's life, isn't it? So, you can do all the research, which I know I do and many people do, and then there's always going to be things that you learn along the way. And so it's like having that balance between both and the preparedness and also just being open to explore new ways of doing things or learn lessons as they come up and just keep moving forward from there. So I think that's really great advice. And I'd love to know, are there any exciting projects coming up for you both this year, whether it's with your tiny home or you're sharing on your pages or anything else that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Yes. Well, talking about researching and being prepared for moving into a tiny home, I've started writing a book about exactly that. It's going to follow on like from all of our experiences, but give a bit of real advice in terms of the steps to take prior. So budgeting, paying off your debt for one, because that was one of the most massive things for us. I don't think it's possible to achieve what the kind of perception of financial freedom with a tiny house is unless you pay off all of your other personal debt first. So, but yeah, I mean, I've already started just documenting, obviously through our Instagram, but it's touching on a lot more stuff than that. Yeah, so that's a work in progress at the moment. I'm going back to uni this year too, so I'll be doing a Bachelor of Arts and I'll be majoring in fine art and professional writing and publishing. So that ties in with the book I'm writing. I'm going to get a bit more education on how to write professionally. So that's my project for the next 3 years.
Mine's not as sexy as that. I'm pretty much done most of the major projects. I'll probably build a little shed for the firewood for winter. But apart from that, just I'm looking forward to spending a bit more time chilling out on the deck and helping Kath grow veg. And, get ready for next fire season, I think. We'll get ready for winter first, but then, do a bit of fire hazard reduction, burning and just making sure everything's clear and just this standard sort of stuff for living in a rural area, what you need to do each year.
I think, the last year has been setting everything up and doing all the big projects, and we've pretty much got all that done. I think I want to focus on trying to make the space more customised to how we want to live in it. For example, our pantry, I'd really love a pull-out pantry because we've got these really deep shelves underneath the stairs. So I think I'll be looking at little things like that would be, if we designed the place, that's what we would have included, but we can start modifying Matt's nodding at me like, oh, great, more work.
So maybe the firewood shed's not the last thing that I'm doing.
It's always a work in progress, isn't there? There's like so many things to work on as you go. And, that's really exciting about your book, Kathy. I think that will be a really helpful resource for a lot of people. And, I to my knowledge, I don't feel like there's anything out there in terms of what you described for an Australian audience with taking it step by step and all those things. So I think that's great. Excited to see that unfold for you. I'm sure you'll be sharing it on your pages, and maybe we'll have to get you back on the show to talk more about it later. And if you're able to let everyone know where they can find and connect with you online.
We've got an Instagram account, and it's A Tiny Life After All.
Beautiful. I will put that in the show notes. I'll also put everything else that we mentioned in the show notes for anyone that wants to check it out. And you can find those show notes at tinyhouseconversations.com.
Sorry, I was just going to mention, we didn't say before that our tiny house was originally built by designer Eco Tiny Homes. People might be interested if they see pictures on our Instagram and be interested in who actually originally built it. So
thank you for mentioning that. And I actually was going to ask you about that because I'm going to get my home built by them as well. It's actually happening in August this year. And when I saw your home, when I saw your home, I was like, I think that might be a designer Eco Tiny Homes house. So thank you for mentioning that. I'll also put that in the show notes too. And just want to say, Kathy and Matt, thank you so much for your time today and for sharing so generously your stories and experiences of your tiny house life. I know that it's going to be helpful for a lot of people. So thank you again for being here.
Thanks, Lucy. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks, Lucy.
Perfect. And if you're listening to this episode, thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with us today. If you want more Tiny House Conversations, I release new episodes every Thursday. So make sure you hit the subscribe button so you'll know exactly when the new episode is live. And until then, I'll see you next time. Hey, Tiny Lifers, thanks so much for listening. And before you go, one of the best ways to support this podcast is to share the love. That way I can keep bringing you more valuable tiny house conversations to help you on your own tiny journey. So make sure you head over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening to this episode and leave a 5-star rating and review. Thanks so much in advance. I appreciate you and see you in the next session.